It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
I have got so many facets to myself because of all of the skills that I learnt in those mundane, everyday interactions with my children and my family that have elevated me and allowed me to have opportunities that I would never have had without them.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
You, Kylie, had an incident, a conversation is a better word for it, with a friend recently that has been insightful, and that's what we're going to talk about in our podcast today. Tell us about it.
Well, a few weeks ago, it was actually an online conversation, so we weren't face-to-face, but one of my friends and I were chatting. I have been, again, just kind of revisiting this kind of concept of what do I want to be when I grow up?
Right, because when you're in your 40s, that's the time to start to think about that.
Well, all of the kids are getting older now, and I definitely have a little bit more time on my hands to do things that interest me. But because I have spent so much time with the kids over the years, while I've got lots of things that I kind of pique my interest, there's nothing that really stands out as being something I want to do for good.
Okay.
I've been writing for Kylie's Corner for the last couple of years now, and I really enjoy writing, and I feel like I'm getting better at it, and I wondered whether or not that's something I might kind of look into a little bit more. And so one of our friends is actually an editor for a publishing house, and so I just sent her a little message and I said, look, I'm just playing around with this idea. I've been doing, a little bit of writing and I'm really enjoying it, but I'd like to know how to be better at it. And we started this, conversation going, and finally she said, I'm so excited for you that you're thinking about doing something new. She said, I was talking to my husband about it, and we realized, before we had the kids, we had all of these little hobbies that we used to do. We were really interesting.
Right. We used to be interesting before we had kids.
But now we're just boring.
Right.
And it just got me thinking about this kind of idea of being interesting and boring.
You know what they need to do? Have more kids.
Yeah.
Nothing boring when you've got 6 kids.
Well, I don't think they're talking about life being boring. I think they're talking about them
being boring.
Being boring.
Okay.
When, I remember back to the times when we had younger kids and all of our conversations revolved around the kids.
Yeah, it was sleep and it was eating and it was
Well, it was
toileting
usually, yeah.
Yeah, and how hard it is to go
all
and
the
get
gross
everything done.
stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And there wasn't a lot of me time. There wasn't a lot of time to kind of develop myself or do things that I really loved to do or lit me up.
You're sounding a little bit grandmotherly. I can imagine some of our podcast listeners who are in their late 20s sort of going, what's that like to have kids that are so old that you can say, I remember back when? Because it's hard, right? I mean, when you're in the thick of it, it's hard. And I guess I can get why somebody would say, yeah, life feels a little bit boring because it is just so tiring.
But, it just made me start to think about things, and I think about the person that I am now.
Yeah.
It's a direct result of those years that my friend is right in the middle of right now,
Yes.
where she's feeling that she's not interesting.
Yeah.
And the recognition that I am only the person I am now because of those years that felt mundane and felt at times just so ho-hum and hard and, just day-to-day struggle.
Yes, but Kylie, you're not the person because of the struggle. You're the person you are because of the way you approach the struggle. So the choice that you have when you're a young mum specifically, but even a young dad, I mean, I made a pretty big choice around fatherhood as well. The choice that you make, the way you choose to act with intention, that determines what your destiny is. It's the day-to-day decisions that determine destiny. You can't. So I like you're incredible with birthday parties. You're amazing with events. You're an incredible. I mean, just fabulous, stunning in the kitchen. You know how to do all this stuff. But it's because when we made the decision, primarily when you made the decision that you were going to stay at home and raise the kids rather than go out to work, you put your heart and soul into it. You put everything into it, and it was mundane, and it was hard, and it was banal, and it was boring. But you put everything into it, and that has led to the growth. That's led to you being the phenomenon that Mrs. Happy Families is today.
100%. It's very much about intention.
Yeah.
And for me, when I look back on those years, and even now, I mean, I'm still developing, I'm still growing, I'm still learning. The thing that I have loved the most is there are some strengths that I have tapped into. And the number one strength would be creativity. Like, I love to be creative. And so before we had kids, I was doing craft all the time. And then we had kids and I tried to keep doing craft and it just got hard. And so you talk about birthday parties, you talk about planning, you talk about, just doing events for the kids and things like that. That's where I was able to utilize my creativity in the kitchen, learning new recipes. That was how I kind of explored my creativity, but it was actually out of necessity.
Can we just, I want to paint the picture here. This isn't where you sort of went, well, I used to be creative like this, but now we have children, so I'm going to be creative like that. That's not what happened. I remember you would be sitting in the room on the bed in a heap going, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I've taken on too much. This was a ridiculous idea. I've got no idea how I'm going to make this event work. And the headaches and the challenge and the trial that you went through to make each of these events what it became, this was not an easy thing for you. And it's not like you wanted to be doing these things. Quite often you were doing it because you felt duty bound to do it, but you just wanted to give the kids a good experience. But again, you put your heart and soul into it, and the learning that you've had, the experiences that you've had have shaped who you are now. And nothing was boring about it, but it was really, really hard. And at the time it felt like it was boring.
You know, one of the things that actually was pivotal to shaping me was actually living on a budget. All of those years while you were a student, I had to find ways to be creative and to give the kids experiences without it hurting us financially.
With literally, I remember one year we did a homemade Christmas because we had no money for Christmas gifts at all. And so we just made the decision, all right, homemade Christmas, we have to make stuff for everyone.
Which I thought was a great idea at the time.
Wasn't it? I mean, it was a massive drama, but how much did we learn and how much fun was it?
Well, I had to make presents for everyone.
But
then I had to spend one-on-one time with 6 children at various ages who had all got one sister. We did secret sisters.
Yep.
One sister to make a present for and work with them without anyone else knowing what was going on. It was so much work and I was exhausted at the end of it, but one of our favourite Christmas memories.
Yeah. And I think you started preparing for Christmas in September because it was a homemade Christmas and we had no money. What's this got to do with, actually, before I ask that question, a quick point. Creativity is infinite. Unless you're tired, creativity is really limited. When you're super tired, you're just like, I have no capacity for creativity. But creativity itself is infinite. You think about how many bajillions of songs have been written. You think about how many stories have been told. You think about how many inventions have been created and how many there will yet be. Creativity is infinite. And so from a parenting point of view, when we're looking at the mundane, everyday ho-hum stuff that we're traipsing through, especially when the kids are young and we are that exhausted, we can come up with an infinite number of ways to play with the kids, an infinite number of ways to host a party for the kids, an infinite number of ways to discipline the kids in positive and efficient, effective, productive ways. I think we just need to illustrate that, and recognizing that creativity is infinite should give every parent who's exhausted and over it some hope that if they just look at it a little bit differently, just try something new, it will change the way their family feels. And in 10, 15, 20 years' time, I mean, we've been parenting now for 23 plus years. Over time, it changes and shapes who you become. Being creative is really vital to that process.
At one of the times in our lives where time was so limited, funds were so low, and we were really, really struggling. And
You've been yesterday.
I needed an outlet.
Yeah.
I remember finding joy in mending.
Yeah.
People would hand clothes down to us all the time because we had 6 girls. And so they were constantly hand-me-downs coming through the door, left, right and centre. And I would go through the bags and find clothes that were ripped or, kind of just stretched out of place. And I would spend a handful of minutes just putting them back into shape. And I found so much joy out of that, finding something that was completely ruined, destroyed, couldn't be used again, and I would make it into something that the kids could wear.
I haven't seen that sewing machine for a while.
No,
I remember one time you pulled apart a few pairs of jeans and turned them into a cushion cover.
Well, before that, it was actually a baby's activity blanket, and that was my favourite.
That's right. Yeah, use
the belt loops for toys to be attached to it, pockets to hide things in. It was so much fun.
So when you're having this conversation with our friend and she's saying, life's boring, we're boring, having children has ruined the fun that we have in life, what's the real upshot? What's the real outtake here of this conversation? Because I feel like we've talked a lot about being creative and maximising resources with even when they're limited, being creative with that. But what's the central thing that you're trying to get at for any mum who's kind of going, yeah, I kind of miss my life before kids?
For me, as I look back on those years, I recognise that the person I am today, I couldn't be this person. And I feel like I'm quite an interesting person these days. I have got so many facets to myself because of all of the skills that I learnt in those mundane, everyday interactions with my children and my family. I didn't see it at the time. It just often felt really hard, and I was frustrated because I wanted more time to be able to do the things that I loved. But it's actually been those hard years in the trenches, working alongside my kids to create experiences for them that they'll remember, that have elevated me and allowed me to have opportunities that I would never have had without them. Would never have had without them. And now my events aren't little kids' birthday parties. I'm doing big events for big adults, weddings and things like that I would never have attempted to do if it hadn't have been for the little birthday parties I did in the backyard.
I love that. I love that idea. The idea that you've got to start somewhere. So start small with a 2-year-old because it doesn't matter what it's like, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. It's another reason to have more kids.
Well, the other thing that really stood out to me about it is in those early years, often we spend our time with other mums. And I think about all of the skills that I learned. Like, I wasn't always good at doing things, but there were always other people around me who were, and we were able to share ideas with each other. And that's what I absolutely loved, because now we're all kind of older and our kids are moving on. People are doing different things with their lives, and it's harder to get together than it was when we had little kids at home.
When I hear you say that, what I'm really hearing is it can be easy for some people to forget who they were when they become a mum. But that's, I think, what you're saying is part of the beauty of becoming a mum. You, in some ways, you don't completely leave that behind. Who you were shapes who you become. But once you're a mum, if you invest in it the right way, it actually shapes you and helps you to grow in a whole lot of new ways that make you better, more capable, and change the trajectory of your life.
There is nothing boring about being a mum. And I look at these two friends of ours and I think they've got a fascinating life, and they are so creative and they bring so much joy to their children's lives and to the families that associate with them.
Yeah, let's wrap up with just some really cool research from Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert. He's written a bunch of really, really best-selling books, really best-selling. Can I say that? He's some really great psychology books. And he talks about how when you ask people in their 30s how much they've grown in the last decade, they say, oh, amazingly, so much. But when you ask them, do you think there's much to go? They'll usually say, oh, yeah, a little bit. There's definitely some room for growth, but the last decade was seriously the most growth that I've ever had in my life. And then you ask people when they're 40, what happened in the last decade, and they say, oh, I thought my 20s was big, but the 30s, holy smokes. And how much to go? Well, yeah, I reckon there's probably a bit more to go, but this was the big decade. And then you get somebody who's 50 and they say, oh, my 40s, holy cow, I can't believe how much I progressed, how much I grew. What the research shows is this pattern continues up until the time we're about 80. We're in our 80s before we start to say, oh, yeah, maybe I'm slowing down a bit now. And what that tells me is there is so much hope. There's so much opportunity for growth and development if we've got our eyes open for it, if we're looking for it, and if we can somehow find the opportunity for a little bit more creativity, a little bit more contribution, a little bit more involvement with the kids. It makes a huge difference. I'm so glad you had that conversation. Thanks for the insights.
I am too. It was really good to reflect on it and to see how much I've grown over the years.
Yeah. Well, you have. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media, with Craig Bruce acting as our executive producer. For more information about making your family happier, please visit us for a whole lot of resources at happyfamilies.com.au.